presidency. And for that, we bring in Rich Rubino to give us an idea, a presidential historian, of his record as president. Of course, we have to mention, as most people know, that he was a one-term president for a reason. The economy was in pretty bad shape. We were in the midst of stagflation during his presidency. Couldn't quite fix it, though he did appoint Paul Volcker, who actually squeezed inflation out of the economy during the Reagan administration. That appointment was made by President Carter. We should also say he did a lot of deregulation activities that the current DOGE team that's going to be helping President-elect Trump while he's in office to deregulate the economy. Jimmy Carter did a lot of that. He deregulated the trucking industry, essentially disassembled the Civil Aeronautics Board, appointed Al Kahn to lead that organization, who was a Democrat, a moderate Democrat who believed in deregulation. That's why most of us can fly airplanes as often as we do now, because of the deregulation that took place during the Carter years. So having said all that, Rich, how do you summarize the presidency of Jimmy Carter?
Well, I think that it's interesting because contemporaneously, a lot of people look back at Jimmy Carter and they say, well, he was a traditional liberal Democrat. He really wasn't. And I think that when you listen to Stu Eisenstadt's comments there, he was talking about the accomplishments of the Carter administration. I think for the most part, they were more or less moderate or conservative. Obviously, there was the deregulation. There was certainly the increase in the military budget. But also, and interestingly, when he came into office, I think that most traditional Democrats like Tip O'Neill, Robert Byrd, wanted more Great Society type programs of Lyndon Johnson, the traditional Democratic programs. Jimmy Carter didn't want that. He wanted a balanced budget by 1981. And when he came into office, the Democratic Congress sent him some appropriations bills for water projects, about $10.1 billion. And Jimmy Carter vetoed it, and he relied on Republican votes to sustain his veto. In 1979, 1980, he had not one but two major challengers for the Democratic presidential nomination running from the left. One of them was Jerry Brown, the governor of California,
sure,
and the other was Ted Kennedy, the senator from Massachusetts. And much of the Democratic establishment never really accepted Jimmy Carter as one of their own. He was a Southern Baptist, so former one-term governor of Georgia. And I think there was always a movement within the Democratic Party that they wanted somebody who was more of a traditional Democrat, if you will. And I think that hurt Jimmy Carter in terms of his own party. But if you look at the accomplishments that he had during his presidency, most of them were really more conservative, and they were with Republican votes.
Although he did have people pushing him on the left to take certain measures, but he could sense that there was a push on the right, a more conservative push in order to strip the stagflation that we had out of our economy, and that thus came the appointment of Paul Volcker. But there were similar pressures, and actually Donald Trump kind of paid him a compliment, and his presidency a compliment, not just the man, but his presidency. Shortly after he died, he said, and I'm quoting Donald Trump here, "The challenges Jimmy faced as president came at a pivotal time for our country, and he did everything in his power to improve the lives of all Americans. For that, we all owe him a debt of gratitude." Of course, there is a big difference between Donald Trump and Jimmy Carter, but there was a similarity in the presidency that they came into. Carter came in under the shadow of Watergate, where people had a grave mistrust in government as a result of what happened during Watergate, and how the Department of Justice in particular had been misused by President Nixon. Jimmy Carter came in to kind of straighten a lot of that out. A lot of folks now would say that's exactly what has happened during the last 4 years, where the Department of Justice and the FBI became politicized, and Donald Trump aims to strip that out of our system, of the deep state, if you will. So there is a similarity that Donald Trump sees. Do you think that's fair?
Yes, and I think it's really entrancing when you think about the kind of eerie similitudes between the two. They're both really outsiders. Even in Jimmy Carter's case, he had been a one-term governor, before that a state senator for 2 terms, and there was a Harris poll in late 1974 of the potential Democratic presidential candidates. You had candidates like Henry Scoop Jackson of Washington, Fred Harris of Oklahoma, Birch Bayh of Indiana. Jimmy Carter was so obscure that his name did not even appear as a potential Democratic candidate in 1974. Consequently, Carter went all over Iowa, all over New Hampshire, campaigned. At one point, he was talking to a clerk at a store, and he said, "I'm Jimmy Carter. I'm running for president." The guy said, "President," said Jimmy who, and then the Carter kind of campaign kind of used that. Donald Trump, very similar. Donald Trump really took on the political establishment the way that Jimmy Carter did. In Donald Trump's case, he had folks like Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, running against him, and he was really the person who came from the outside. People in both cases wanted an outsider. And interestingly, it was interesting today because the relationship between Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford, given though they ran really kind of a very rivalrous campaign in 1976, they later came together. And I was reminded that they both made decisions that could have cost them their presidency. One of them, in Gerald Ford's case, very unpopular. He was at 70% when he pardoned. The day he pardoned Richard Nixon, he went down to 48%. The day after he pardoned Richard Nixon, he never quite recovered. In Jimmy Carter's case, part of it was putting Paul Volcker in charge of the Federal Reserve. This was right before 1980, and obviously his tight money policy was not something that's going to benefit a president in the interim. And you heard Stu Eisenhower saying that basically he told Paul Volcker, "You worry about the politics. You worry about the policy. I'll worry about the politics."
Right.
But there are so many similarities between Ford and Carter.